could have stopped me with the data policy.
Before we dive into what a data policy is, talk to me about a connector in Power Platform. What is a connector?
Yeah, because of course, like, why would you bother to deal with data policies when you don't know what they are? Well, yeah, so a connector is a way to connect to a particular service. To put it into really simple terms, it's a way to connect to an API. So you're sending a request to a particular URL, a particular website address, in order to send data or get data, that kind of thing. So connectors are for that. So to give an example of a connector, you might have a connector for Outlook, and that connector might be able to send an email or maybe read your inbox. So that's the kind of thing that a connector is. And there are literally hundreds of connectors within Power Platform. Can I bounce it back to you to ask you, what are data loss prevention policies? How do they relate to connectors?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think before I jump into that, I just want to say that these connectors, they're sort of like the lifeblood of Power Platform, right? I think without these connectors, there's not really much you would be able to do, because everything that makers do connect to some sort of service or data, and this is the whole point of a connector. So yeah, I see them as a lifeblood. So why is it important to, I guess, secure a connector then, and what does that mean? So when we've got all of these connectors in place, hundreds of thousands of connectors that we've got, we don't really want data to just, sprawl and leak out of an organization or be sent to another tenant or to a user's Gmail account, for example, right? So this is where data policies come in, data loss prevention policies come in, and how they can kind of help secure and further govern a Power Platform kind of estate, right? And one of the kind of key things there is there's typically lots and lots of environments in a tenant, and being able to scope a policy to particular tenants to be more permissive or more restrictive is really important. So if we look into this in a bit more of a deep dive and how we actually go about, managing a data policy, we've got a couple of different types. So we've got policies that can be applied at the tenant level and policies that can be applied at the environment level. Let's go and create a data policy now and go through that, and hopefully we'll have some questions to ask along the way, which you can help with, Charles.
Do you know, I noticed that I called them data loss prevention policies, which is what they used to be known as, but now they're just called data policies.
That's right, and this is Microsoft changing terminology on a week-by-week basis, isn't it? So by the time this video comes live to you, the audience, it's probably changed again, but as of time recording, it is data policy. So we'll try and keep that terminology as we go forward.
So it has a wider scope now, doesn't it? It's not just about data loss prevention, but it's just policies about data in general.
Exactly, that's right. And yeah, it's important to, I guess, understand where Microsoft are going with these types of things, isn't it? So if we want to look at data policies and where to create them, we would go to the admin center in Power Platform, into security, and then into data and privacy, and then a data policy. You'll see it there. I always lose or forget where to go. So that's a really good kind of reminder as to how to get into and create data policies. What we'll do here is if we click on new policy, this is going to allow us to create a new data policy. And it's going to guide us through basically the creation of a data policy. So it's fairly straightforward at this point. It gets a little bit more complex as we go, as we need to start making decisions. But Charles, any thoughts on how we should name our policy?
Do you know what? It's something I've never thought about, but it's probably something that I should have thought about. Yeah, I think, well, generally you want to have an initial data policy that is your kind of catch-all, your default. So you want everything to be in there by default, and then you put them into something else by exception. What do you think?
Yeah, I would agree. And it's a good way, again, with anything that we're naming, is name it logically. There's no hard or fast rule here, right? But as long as it's logical to your organization, you can refer back to it and you understand what it's doing, then that's the main takeaway when we're actually thinking about naming policies. So, we could call it, DLP catch-all or something really kind of basic here. But as an example, it allows us to proceed to the next step. And something that I'd like to call out before we even look at the connectors is the default group. What does that do, Charles? Why should I be kind of aware of that?
So you know that we said that there are hundreds of connectors. Well, there are more being added all the time. And so if a new connector is being added, you need to decide what you want to happen with that being added. Are you happy for a brand new connector to be immediately used by everyone? Or is that potentially dangerous for your organization? Would you prefer for those brand new connectors to go into blocked, and then on a regular cadence, you can then look at those new connectors and decide where should they really be? So I think the advice always is to put them into blocked by default. That's what I've noticed from everyone, and that's what I agree with. And it does mean, though, that if those connectors are going to be used by people, that you do then need to move them out of blocked. But it depends on your organization as to how you want to deal with that. Like, you might be happy just to leave everything in blocked, and when someone says they want to use something, then you can assess it. So that's an easy way to reduce the administrative burden. Or if you feel like you really want to be on top of things, and maybe you want to encourage the use of connectors, you could decide every 2 weeks we're going to look at the latest connectors that have been added and see if we can get our people to use them.
That makes sense. I'd say as well, although it adds more administrative overhead by setting all new connectors that get added into blocks, it is a very kind of secure way of doing it. So typically see that as a kind of best approach by organizations when thinking about data loss prevention policies. Perhaps as you've got maybe a preview environment or something you don't want that to happen in, but as a baseline, that feels like the most secure and sensible approach in my mind. Okay, so we will just set all new connectors to be blocked, then set that at the Now we've got the opportunity to kind of pick and choose our connectors, don't we? So by default, you can see here we've got pre-built connector selected, and now everything is in non-business. So let's talk about what the differences are here and kind of what that means. So blocked, I think, is really obvious, isn't it? It just means that anything in blocked we can't use. Now, we've obviously set that as a default group, so anything new that comes in, anything new that gets added is going to be kind of put in block by default. We can't use it, full stop. But then we've got this concept of non-business and business. It's not immediately clear as to kind of what either or does. So, so non-business connectors generally are a category of connectors that are defined for kind of non-sensitive data. So anything that's in the non-business category cannot share data with any other connectors in other groups. So if I have a connector in SharePoint connector in non-business, and say I had the OneDrive for Business connector in the business category, I would not be able to share data between the two services. Is that how you understand that as well, Charles?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. So if we had, say, Twitter or X in non-business, and then we had Dataverse in business, it would mean that we can't accidentally post our Dataverse data to Twitter, right?
Yeah, that's it, exactly. So that's really important to kind of start thinking about what do we want where. So that's where business comes in. And I guess it starts to make a little bit more sense now, doesn't it? So anything that's in the business category is for connectors that have got critical/sensitive data in that we don't want kind of leaking outside the organization. So let's say we've got sensitive data in SharePoint, which maybe is a bit of a moot point, but we'll not mull over that too much. But let's say it's there and we don't want that data to get shared anywhere else other than, with any other connectors that are in the business category. That's a good place to put it. So when you're kind of looking at what to put where, really think about kind of how you want data to interact with each other, all these connectors to interact with each other, because like Charles mentioned, do you really want Dataverse data being leaked into Twitter or being able to actually interact with Twitter or X? Absolutely not. So really think about that when setting up. There's no right or wrong way to go about doing this. It's on an organization by organization kind of thing. But yeah, it takes a little bit of time. You're seeing here, non-business, there's 1,512 connectors in non-business. I think we can select most of them by default and move them. So we don't have to click through them one by one. What you will notice, though, is that some connectors can't be blocked. So that's a real important distinction that I want to just kind of touch on. And I believe Dataverse is one of the connectors that can't be blocked. So by default, we cannot block a Dataverse connector. So if you were thinking, I'll spin up a new environment, I don't want, with Dataverse, I don't want anyone to use it, so I'll just put in the block DLP policy or data policy. You can do that. And there's a few other connectors like that, but it's important to say if it's listed as blockable as no, then you can only move it between business and non-business, not blocked. So there's a number of connectors, and HTTP being one of them, and HTTP with Microsoft Entra ID, Microsoft Entra ID pre-authorized. There's a bunch of them that you can configure. You can see the endpoint configurable. So do you want to kind of talk about what that means? Because there are a few, aren't there, that I've got that can be configured.
Yeah, it's really interesting. If you go to the ellipsis, so the 3 dots, then we have this extra option for them where we can configure the connector and then configure endpoints. It's in preview at the moment. And when you click on that, it then means that we get these rules that we can apply to that connector to say it can only go to certain URLs, so only go to certain website addresses. So this is where you might want to allow people to access a particular website, but not all of the others, for example. So we might say that we're happy for people to make HTTP requests to our service within our organization, but we don't want them to just make those requests to anything or anywhere. I guess there's currently a caveat for this that hasn't been patched as far as I know, which is where even if you're blocking something in this at the moment, in Power Automate, if you use Compose and you put that URL in the Compose and then put it into the HTTP request, you can actually bypass that block. So it is in preview at the moment. Don't expect it to fix everything for you. Hopefully they'll patch that, and hopefully it will move out of preview, and then it's going to be a really, really, really useful tool in order to protect your organization.
Yeah, you can really see the value of allowing this, because being able to kind of limit what would be a connector that could access anything on the web, effectively bypassing all these policies that you've worked hard to fine-tune and build, it's going to be really powerful. Obviously, you can use it now, but it's in preview, like Charles mentioned, but, use that with caution if you do plan to use it. But yeah, hopefully it'll be GA soon, and we'll really start seeing the power of the kind of endpoint filtering. So yeah, it's a really good feature to call out, and definitely something to think about when you're configuring your data policies. So what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to add, let's just say SharePoint, and we're going to move that as a business connector. So we've got one connector in the business category. We move on now to custom connectors. So what's good about data policies is we can actually add our custom connectors to our data policy and block them. So if you're in an organization that has custom connectors made, and again, All a custom connector is, it's just a wrapper around API calls. So again, they can be quite powerful. The ability to block them is pretty crucial when you've then got a catalog of connectors. So by default, I believe it blocks them all. Does it? Let's see. Data group ignore. No, it doesn't. But you'd probably want to just block them by default. And then on a case-by-case basis, enable or allow your connector as you go. Would you agree with that, Charles?
Yeah, absolutely. Because a custom connector is similar to the HTTP request connector, isn't it? It's that you get basically absolute freedom to communicate with anything. So they can be very dangerous.
And one thing to call out here is around the use of pattern matching. So if a custom connector has a particular pattern in its URL, you can kind of match against that using pattern matching to block that custom connector.
So I see a really nice use for pattern matching would be, let's say that your organization has subscribed to a particular service and maybe they have a subdomain. So maybe it's your organization dot whatever the services.com. So you want to make sure that when you're communicating with that custom connector, that you're only going to that subdomain because that's your organization. And if you went to some other subdomain, you could be accessing another organization's data. So that's a great way where you can use that pattern matching to make sure that you're only talking to the specific server that you want to talk to.
Yeah, good advice. Yeah, definitely agree with that. So once we've looked at our custom connector patterns and configured that, we then move on to scope. I think scope's quite self-explanatory here, isn't it? You're just saying, where do you want this policy to apply? We can add it to all environments. Maybe good for a baseline policy where you've got connectors that will 100% need to be blocked across the full tenant. But you can also add it to multiple environments or exclude certain environments as well. So how does that work, Charles? You want to just give a bit of an explanation on those two options?
Yeah, sure. I like the concept of the baseline policy as well as a policy name. We were talking about policy names before, but hadn't come up with a definitive guide for that. So let's say you could have your baseline policy, which is your absolutes. You could have your default policy, which is where the majority of things go, maybe. And then you might have your more specific policies. And for these next two options would be where you'd have your more specific policies. So one way you could say, I only want to add these environments to the policy. And the other one is where you're saying, I only want to exclude these environments from the policy. And it will depend on which is going to be the most, going to require the most manual effort, right? As to whether you want to add or you want to exclude. So you're looking at which is the larger group.
Perfect, thank you. So I guess, because there could be multiple overlapping policies here, couldn't there? So let's dive into that in a second. So I'm keen to kind of give our viewers a bit of an insight of how that would work. So I'm just going to add this to all environments, review, and click create. And that's going to go and create our DLP catch-all policy or our baseline policy here. But we've got a few other policies in this view that we can see. So there might be overlapping policies where maybe SharePoint's blocked in the catch-all, but it's actually a business connector in the default environment. How would that work when we're talking about overlaps? Because it's quite a complicated concept, isn't it?
Yeah, you can imagine that if you have many data policies that you could get very muddled up with what's going on and get lots of confusing DLP policy violations going on. So one of the ways that you can find out which policies apply to an environment would be if it's a managed environment, which, as we spoke about in our previous videos, that's where you need everyone to be licensed within the environment. Josh, can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so when we're looking at managed environments and data policies, we can obviously apply our policies to our multiple environments, but you don't automatically get insight into what policy is applied to what environment. With managed environments, you do. which is a really nice feature that you get. Again, you're paying for all that licensing. You want these governance features out of the box, and that's what managed environments gives you. And you'll be able to click into an environment and see what data policies are applied to that environment. It's really handy, really useful, quick and easy. I believe if you click into an environment that's managed, so what we can do if we've got a managed environment is we can actually see what data policies have been applied to each environment, which is really handy. So if I go into my environments under manage, see I've got my own environment here, and click edit managed environments, scroll to the bottom here, there is a nice little setting around see active data policies for this environment. If I click on that, that's going to take me to the data policies and show which ones are applied to that environment. So it's really useful. But there is another way if you don't have managed environments. Do you want to talk a little bit about that other method, Charles?
So if you want to know what data policies are impacting on an environment, but you don't have managed environments, you can use the Center of Excellence Starter Kit for this. So we've gone into our Center of Excellence Starter Kit environment. We've gone to Solutions. And of course, it's a managed solution that we've imported into there. And we go to the Center of Excellence Core Components solution. And in that, maybe you know, maybe you don't know, but we have so many hundreds of things that we can look at. The quickest way to get to it, I think, is just to click on apps. So filter down to apps. And then we've got data policy impact analysis. So then you can just click on that and you play the app. And I already have it available here. So this app will then show us, and like Josh, you added your new data policy, so we should be able to see that if we refresh. It takes a little while to update the information, a little while to refresh. In the top right-hand corner, you can select the environment that you want to look at. So Josh, let's look at your environment, and it will tell you which data policies are being applied to it.
Really quite straightforward doing it that way, isn't it? And I guess it's important to note that although this is technically a free way, you still need a license to access the starter kit, which is a subject we're hoping to get into in a future episode as well, isn't it? The starter kit. So we look forward to bringing that to our audience. Okay, so I think we've covered quite a lot. I guess that the final kind of comments from me is just around the kind of the way the multiple policy kind of concept affects another policy and how that would work. So we've kind of talked about that a little bit, but if you have multiple policies and you've got one that's permitted or a connector that's permitted in one policy but blocked in the other, the blocked one is always going to win. It's always going off of the principle of least privilege, right? So that is something to look out for. There is a really good article on Microsoft Learn around multiple policies, the impact of that, and how to kind of work with it. We'll include that in the description of the video. But worth looking at, because I think that's a complicated subject and it can get very confusing very quickly. But the Microsoft Learn article, I feel, is very, very good at explaining how that all works with multiple policies and what would work where. So something to think about if you're creating a policy for your tenant, for your organization, really think about how you categorize your business, non-business, and blocked connectors, how that's going to apply to your environment strategy, which we've talked about in previous videos, and how that's then going to impact your makers as they start building kind of solutions in the Power Platform. Okay, so that's been a really good kind of run through on the data policies. Charles, is there anything else you think that we should add that's going to give value to our viewers in this video?
I think we've covered everything that's the most important. So now people can go off and start creating their data policies, and their makers will start building things. But we do need to tell them more about the Center of Excellence Starter Kit. We definitely need to go more into licensing. So in future videos, we're going to cover those. What I would like to know from our viewers is, have you applied data policies and how have you decided to go about it? Have you created lots of them? Have you tried to keep it to just a very small amount of them? How is it working for you? It's very interesting to hear from different organizations. And if you are commenting that, it's good to know what size of organization you've got, because that's very important in determining how things should be run.